I have a second, please?
Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Title. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show the Commission unanimously approved the staff recommendation for MCM 281524. May I have a motion to approve the staff recommendation for Third Wellness Incorporated MPN 281424 product manufacturer?
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Title. All in favor?
Aye.
Let the record show the Commission unanimously approved the staff recommendation for MPN 281424. I think we're done with our provisional licenses. I wanted to thank Kyle particularly for taking some of the burden off our executive director in these meetings, but also to the entire licensing and investigation staff. This is a pretty prodigious amount of work done in 2 weeks. And I did tell the executive director when he told me how many were going to be on the agenda for this week that he has just raised the bar. So I'm sorry, but you guys have done such a good job that our expectations are proportionately increased. But thank you very much for the time today, but also for the work that has gone behind this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Executive Director, anything else on licensing? Okay, there are 2 more agenda items. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will vote on them if we're ready to. If there are issues that require further work by the staff, we'll defer the vote, but we'll start the conversations and see where we get to. The first of these is the Code of Ethics. The law that created the Commission, Chapter 55, Act of 2017, requires us to develop the State Code of Ethics. I want to thank our legal staff. I know that they've been working very hard on this. I think we're grateful to Christine's leadership. Pauline comes from the Department of Ethics, so that's been an enormous benefit. So thank you very much. I think you guys have done a great job on this. It's a complicated and important issue, so thank you very much for your work on this. This has been distributed to the Commission for about a week or so hopefully everybody's had time to digest and have raised concerns. But I'd like to ask the Commission to start with, are there any questions of clarification that you'd like to ask either the Executive Director or legal staff? And then we can talk about if you have any concerns with specific elements. But start, are there any issues of clarification?
I have a couple of areas.
Commissioner McBride.
So I guess I'll just list them. I've already provided this list to the legal staff, so just do this with the rest of the Commission. The Commission knows what I'm looking at. So on page 8, there is a delineation under unwarranted privileges in C and D. If we could provide some clarity on definitions of official authority and official dealings in C and D, I think that would be helpful. I originally was looking at the term constituents and definition of constituents, but I think that the real issue may actually be in defining those 2 terms instead. The second area is also on page 8 in E.
There's 2 E's.
I'm sorry, it's 11E.
Thanks.
So the targeted solicitations, if we could either define targeted solicitations or differentiate it from other general solicitations, just to have an understanding of what the parameters are. I know that I imagine there are charitable interests on members of this Commission that, if possible, I think people would probably like to remain engaged in. The definition of political activity, this is kind of marbled throughout, but I know it's easier said than done. I think the federal law and some protocols from federal agencies provide some helpful guidance on how to define political activity, but that's a little bit of an amorphous term that it would be helpful to have some context or examples of. And then on pages 10 and 11, the term confidential records, just to have a better understanding of what the legal staff thinks of as confidential records and what we need to be thinking of as a Commission as what's confidential and at what point is it no longer confidential. That's all I have.
Appreciate that. Any other questions or any questions for Mary?
Actually, I'm sorry, I just wanted one more.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
It's my view on this that I think that these are definitions that can be developed by the legal staff. I think they can be developed by the legal staff in conjunction with the commissioners by virtue of the fact that the staff is allowed to have a conversation
Sure.
without sharing.
Sure.
So there wouldn't be a violation of the open meeting law if it were done through staff. So I think that this clarification isn't intended to hold up the process of getting this done. I do think that it's important prior to commencing operations of an operator in Massachusetts that we do have this in place, just because I think that that is going to be a benchmark moment. We have been operational for a year without this enhanced code of ethics, and so I think that it's sort of time to put this into place. So I just want to kind of put that into context.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Commissioner Tuttle, you?
My questions of clarification and my suggestions for edits are mixed together, so.
Okay, good. Go ahead, that's fine.
So, I have 10 copies. And Commissioner McBride and I are very much on the same page, so you'll see a lot of the same comments.
Okay.
Also want to thank the legal staff. It's a really well thought out document, and I already had a lot of questions, and every line was very well thought out, so I appreciate that. So the first one is on page 4, and while everybody's getting the document, I just want to say I think it's really important that we spend as much time as we need with this document. I'm thinking of it almost like our Constitution, and we're the founding mothers and fathers, because this is going to be in place for a long time, and I don't know who is going to be on the commission or the staff in the future, and we want to make sure that, of course, we're preventing them from corruption. That's the purpose of this document, and that we're making sure that it's clear, and we're minimizing how much it can be abused, and that it's something that can be enforced. So, okay, starting on page 4, I added just a definition for licensee or registrant. I believe licensee refers to marijuana establishment and registrant refers to registered marijuana dispensary. Is that correct?
The only thing I'd say, at least in terms of the medical regulations, I think registrant might also refer to patients and caregivers and agents. So it's a little broader.
Okay, so I think we need to clarify that because, I don't think you can have a financial interest in a
Okay,
patient.
well, that's not right. No, it's right. But the clarification is required.
Okay.
So let's keep-
Okay, so is the plan here that I'll go through edits and then come back with another?
Well, I'm trying, let's see where we are, and after everybody's made comments, I'm very cognizant of Commissioner McBride's request that we try to do this before a final commencement of operations is issued. I just want to think about the logistics as we go through this.
Okay, well, so then I would also be fine with just directing some of the
Yep.
changes to be made.
Fine, so
Okay.
let's go ahead and we'll assess where we are after everybody's had a chance to make comments.
Okay, so moving on to page 7, with regards to receiving gifts from close associates, there is a definition of close associate in our regulations. There's also close associates that are disclosed in the application process, so I think we should clarify which one. Preferably those that are disclosed in the application process so we know who they are. And then similarly, affiliate, I just don't know what the definition is there. Okay, and then B, a commissioner or employee who is offered any such gift must disclose the offer. So the way I read that would be like every time we get like a LinkedIn message that's like, can I pick your brain and buy you coffee, that we would have to see if they fit one of these and then disclose it. And if that's true, just kill me because that is really broad. So I would suggest either we cut it, or if we're really trying to get a certain type of gift that's offered that doesn't include like an invitation or a coffee, that we clarify that. Moving on to number 10B. No commissioner or employee shall engage in private business relationships or other private dealings. I don't know what "or other private dealings" means, so I would either suggest defining it or cutting it. On page 8, I flagged constituents as well, but I think now that Commissioner McBride mentioned it, the issue is really the definition of official dealings, not constituents. So that, I mean, constituents could apply to any citizen of Massachusetts, I think, but as long as we know what official dealings means, I think that's fine. F, so I moved this from the social media section because I don't think this should have a social media section. So most of the content is still there, but I suggest we move this line here because it has to do with how we use resources, and I think that is actually a question of unwarranted privileges.
There's no change to the language, just located it.
That's exactly right. So 11E, targeted solicitations needs a definition. My understanding is that it would be something like tagging or mentioning or like a private message, but that needs to be clear. Also, because this was also in the social media section, I don't think it needs to be repeated. That's why I added this language. For example, donations or support for a private or charitable cause. Otherwise, that's verbatim. Okay, number 12, political activity. This might warrant some discussion, but I put a note that this is based on state law and is not intended to be more restrictive than state law, which is my impression of what's already there. And the reason I think it should be a note is because we all have to be trained in the state law requirements, and I think it would be very difficult to keep track of two different types of political activity restrictions, and I don't think that we should be trying to limit the civic engagement of commissioners or people who work here. This is a discussion on that. All right, so on page 10, under social media, so A, B, and D are already elsewhere in this document because they have to do with ethics. C, while commissioners and employees may use social media for their personal communications on their own personal time, they should be thoughtful about their postings as their personal postings may be viewed in light of their public position. That has nothing to do with ethics, that has nothing to do with conflicts, and it doesn't belong in an ethics code. And just looking to the future, the reason I don't think they should have a social media section, other than what's already been moved, is because I think that could lead to censorship down the line. So that's why I would suggest cutting that section, leaving A, B, and D elsewhere. Under confidentiality, I agree we need a confidentiality definition. This is the one under state law. Records, information, material, or data within the exemptions to the definitions of public records. But that needs to be tailored. I don't know exactly how, because, for example, personal notes are exempted from public records. So if I had a personal note that I wanted to disclose in some way, I think that would be my right, but it would still come under this definition. B is moved from the social media section. Okay, unlawful conduct, number 14. If a commissioner or employee has been charged with felony, misdemeanor, or ethical misconduct, they should report that incident to the executive director or the legal department. The only way I think that makes sense is if it affects their job duties, like if they are a driver and they had an incident that involves driving, they should have to report that. Otherwise, I don't see why they should have to report that. Number 15, this is an edit that I think is already in the spirit of what's written there. Commissioners should abstain from public comment other than basically in a meeting. I added or is summarizing a comment that was already made in a meeting. Number 12 is just a semantic clarification. No commissioner should disclose confidential records or confidential information. That's it.
Great. Let's keep going. Commissioner Doyle, Commissioner Flanagan, do you have any questions or concerns? Then we'll come back to specific requests and suggestions made by the other commissioners. Commissioner Doyle?
On the underlying policy?
Yeah.
Policy, no. Okay.
Commissioner Flanagan?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
Actually, I do want to make a statement
Please,
though.
please do.
So I really want to thank the legal team for drafting this code of ethics and this proposal that we have in front of us, you know, there's, in public services, nothing more difficult, I think, than determining your own code of ethics and what you have to live by. And certainly we have the Ethics Commission and we have OCPF guidelines to guide us in certain areas. But I think that, you know, the intent is to show the general public that we are working in good faith, that we are going to adhere to a code of ethics as we fulfill our obligations and our duties. And I think sometimes that those lines get blurred between private citizen and public servant, which is why I can appreciate the concerns that Commissioner Title has on social media. You know, when you get into a position, or an appointed position or an elected position, there comes with it some sort of following where people take your word a little bit stronger than others. And I think that, you know, as we're trying to ramp up an agency, we're only 13 months old, well, actually 14 months old now, I think it's November.
So 14 months.
To keep that in mind, that when we are talking about, you know, what we're going to adhere to and what our employees are going to adhere to, we have to recognize the fact that as private citizens we do have certain rights, but then as public servants we do have to live by another code. And so I hope that as we go, we continue to discuss this and that we define these terms that might be a little difficult to interpret on the surface, that we just remember we're trying to get our jobs done and we're trying to do what's right for the people of Massachusetts. I've been through ethics conversations many times over the last 20 years. There's nothing worse than boxing yourself into a corner with a very strict, stringent code of ethics. And so I think that as we look at social media, where that's a new area, when it comes down to how people express themselves, how people use that platform to disseminate information and thought process, that we really take a careful look at this, because as Commissioner Title said, this is going to sort of be set in stone for a long time. And once all of us leave this body, it's going to continue. So I hope that we can be thoughtful in our deliberations.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of give my thought on that particular issue, which is, I agree with Commissioner Title that it doesn't belong in the Code of Ethics. C, is that the A, B, C, and D. C does not belong in the Code of Ethics. I'm not sure, though, that it doesn't belong in a Code of Conduct. And we have not had a conversation, nor are we, I think, legally required to develop a Code of Conduct for ourselves and for the employees of the Commission. But if we do want to do something, I believe it does not belong in this document, it belongs in a Code of Conduct, and I would like at some point to have a conversation amongst the Commission about whether we choose to develop a Code of Conduct. But with respect to the specific document, I agree with you, it doesn't belong in a Code of Ethics. But I think it's an important enough issue that I'd like to get into something, and we can go back to that. Other reactions or comments on the suggestions that were made here, a lot of them are clarification, which I think is fine. But on the more substantive issues, including one I just commented on, Commissioner Title's recommendation that we take out the sections, point C about social media, are there other comments, or do we feel like we can give the staff guidance to go and do some revisions? Commissioner McBride?
So I can see narrowing the social media component of this, but at the end of the day, both OCPF laws and ethics laws, Office of Campaign and Political Finance, and ethics laws are based on protecting individuals who are doing business with the public sector from being coerced in any way. And I think that there's something, at the end of the day, we are a regulatory agency, and we are an agency that regulates businesses, and all of our decisions and anything that we do needs to be viewed through the lens of an unbiased, fair process. And so I think that a narrowing, I can understand. I think that some statement about making sure that we are not using tools that we have in a way that is intended to coerce or otherwise create an environment where we could be perceived in actuality or perceived as being unfair or biased in making a decision, I think it's important, and I think that is I mean, that's what's enshrined in law now. This is supposed to be an enhanced code of ethics. So I think that we need to reiterate that and to make it very clear that as a regulatory agency, you know, our first priority is making sure that things are done fairly and in an unbiased manner when we're making any decision. That's why we do things like this, have open meetings and
that's why we do.
conversations.
Other comments? I guess, is there a specific, are you specifically referring to the third of the public or the social media recommendation, which is about being thoughtful about postings on their SMA the public position? That's the request that Commissioner Tuttle made to have that removed from the document. Were you commenting specifically on that?
I think I'm commenting more generally
Okay,
on the concept of it.
Okay, fine. That's what
Not on social media.
Okay.
Just on something else.
Okay, anything else on social media? Go ahead, Commissioner. Can you just give us a page, please?
Yeah, 1 second. On page 14, on page 11, paragraph 14 on Commissioner titles, draft unlawful conduct. The proposed insert is if the incident affects their job duties. And my question would be, who would determine if the incident affects their job duties? Because I think in context, the suggestion is the employee who has been charged with the crime or ethical misconduct would be the one who's determining whether or not it affects their job duties. That's giving me a little bit of pause, because I am concerned that, you know, they are going to have a necessary bias to want to find that it's not going to affect their job duties out of self-interest. So that just concerns me, and so I will have to think about that.
Commissioner Flanagan? I'm sorry.
I can't remember.
Well, let's stay on this topic for a second.
Okay,
Come back.
sure.
So on this topic, Commissioner Flanagan?
So in this topic, the unlawful conduct, I believe it is in the language that oversees our appointments that we
Certainly for
cannot
the
be charged, for commissioners, that we can't be charged with felonies. If we are charged with felony, then that is a grounds for removal. So I don't have a problem with them just reiterating it. I mean, again, if you want transparency, this is transparent, but I believe it's already in the
It's there for commissioners, I think. I'm not sure it's there for employees. I just guess from my perspective, this is more kind of from private sector perspective. So tell me if this doesn't apply in the public sector. If somebody's committed a felony or has committed an unethical behavior, I want to know about that. And charged. Yes, I want to know about that, and I guess I can't see any argument for not. You can take out misdemeanors maybe, but if someone's charged with a felony, someone is charged with unethical conduct, I want to know about it. I think it's imperative that we know about it. I think it's actually not discharging our responsibilities if we don't know about it and don't consider taking action. So I agree with Commissioner Doyle about I'm not happy with letting the perpetrator, bad word, tell us. But in general, I think felonies and unethical behavior just need to be we need to be aware of them. Go ahead, Commissioner.
So Commissioner Doyle makes a good point. In something like driving, it would be obvious, but in other cases, it may not be so obvious. And I can appreciate your point as well. Can I propose an edit?
Sure.
Can I propose has been convicted of a felony, and then we lose misdemeanor? I don't know if you would be convicted of ethical misconduct. I'd be fine with just leaving charged with ethical misconduct.
Isn't this information public in the courts once you've gone through the court system? So this information can be obtained anyway. So I guess I don't see the problem with them having to promptly report it to us because it's public anyway. Or am I wrong about that?
Well, as far as the charges go, you know, I would defer to Pauline on the ethical. You've been charged by, say, the State Ethics Commission with an ethical issue. I'm not sure if that would be
Part of the public, is that part, that's not, she's saying she's not part of the public record.
It's not.
Yes, if somebody is merely charged before the ethics commission, that's not going to be a public record.
I'm not sensing we're too far apart, and I think there's some work that has to be done on that. I don't know that it makes sense to try to do real-time editing, but I think there seems to be some, I think, enough alignment perhaps to give the staff a chance to work on this. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I think that misdemeanor should stay in there. There are a host of misdemeanors that we would want brought to our attention. I think that misdemeanor should remain in there. I mean, misdemeanor are often, the term can often be misleading in terms of the actual charge and how things are charged. So I would like for misdemeanor to stay in there.
I guess the way to, the question or concern I have, and I'm not speaking for Commissioner Tuttle, obviously, but there's some stuff that just isn't relevant. Like, you can stop for speeding, because otherwise I would be off this commission in a nanosecond. But
I'm not riding with you anymore.
So I think I agree with you. I think I agree with your concern, which is there's some stuff that really is irrelevant. I agree with Commissioner Doyle that I'm not sure I'm comfortable letting the employee decide, or myself as commissioner, decide what's relevant and what's not relevant. So I think that there needs to be some work here, but I understand Commissioner McBride's point. So I think there's some work required in this. I think to Commissioner McBride's earlier point, we can individually work with legal staff to try to at least make sure that our teams are reconciling. I think you can come up with a synthesis. Is that go ahead, General Counsel.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, we can work on this. I think what I would say is, if we anticipate that we can't come to a consensus,
I'm sorry, say that again.
if we could not come to a
Then I
consensus,
think we have to come back here.
Yeah.
But I think we should make a good faith effort to try to come to consensus, because I'm not sensing there's not gigantic difference. There's some differences here, but I'm not sensing that it's not going to be possible to come to consensus. I'd like to try that. If not, obviously, I'm happy to come back and discuss things where we can't come to consensus in a public meeting.
Yeah, I just want to flag one issue we may not have consensus on. I don't know that I agree. I think it's a good suggestion, but I'm still having a concern with us not knowing if someone's charged, because you were proposing the convicted. Yeah. I think I personally would like to know if someone's charged. That's not guaranteeing that I'm going to take action that immediately, I don't have the power to do it, but has a negative impact on the person's job. But I would like to have the information so that I understand what's happening with that particular employee. And otherwise, I think what would end up happening is, we put it at convicted. They're not under any obligation to disclose it to us out of fear. They don't disclose it to us, and then we get blindsided finding out another way.
In the, can I just ask a question of clarification? In the appointment to the commission, is it charged or is it convicted? It's cause for dismissal, let's say. Commissioner? It's convicted? It's convicted. Okay, thank you. I just wanted that clarification. Commissioner Dunn?
Yeah, this can be my last comment on this.
Is that a threat or a promise?
I don't know. So if this only applied to these commissioners and this staff, I would be completely fine with moving ahead.
Right.
However, having to report when you've been charged with a misdemeanor is just not something that I'm comfortable with instituting forever. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out this agency has had presentations made to us by our staff showing us the disparities in the criminal justice system and who gets charged with them.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think when it comes to that, though, we also have in our regulations, and we have we allow for certain convictions to be there, and we're still licensing people. So I don't think the discriminatory nature is part of this body. I think that knowing information is helpful regardless. I mean, we ask people to disclose things all the time. Certainly the disclosure process is there for a reason. I don't think it necessarily means that we're going to take action, but because there is a lot of sensitive information, a lot of things that we're doing, I don't think there's a harm in knowing if someone has been charged. And the difference between charged and convicted, obviously we know what that is, but I think that we have personally taken great pains to be able to allow people to come forward with their what's in their backgrounds or what they may have gone through, and not use that against them.
Go ahead, Commissioner
I
Craig.
guess I would also just point out that when we're talking about the disclosure of this information, I think all of the normal confidentiality that surrounds human resources decisions also applies here. This wouldn't be a conversation that we'd be having at a commission level about someone being charged with something. This would be, it's requiring that it be disclosed to the appropriate supervisor, right? And so, I mean, I guess I think that we just need to kind of draw some pretty clear lines about what this information is and sort of how it would not be used and kind of what it means to ask for this disclosure. And I think also, I mean, you know, another part of this is that I think that it's important for the senior staff of this agency to be able to sort of figure out how to manage the staff also, and you know what, you know, if someone is charged with something, and for instance they're going to be, you know, going to court dates or something, and they're going to need time or whatever it is, you know, have those conversations, be able to put that into place. Also to be able to have a you know, understanding of kind of what might need to be discussed, so that, you know, we take care of our employees, and we want to create an environment for them that's going to be a comfortable, good environment for them to work in. And I think that providing this information and asking for that disclosure so that the executive director or whoever it is can sort of figure out, you know, what the game plan is going to be with regard to the information, and also how human resource, I mean, you know, what human resources maybe needs to do to provide for that environment. I think it's important. I guess
Mr. Chen, I'm going to disregard your last promise and that final last comment and ask you if you have another comment to make.
Just that would be the best case scenario, and probably the scenario that it is right now, right? Where that is what senior staff would want to do in that situation. But we just have to also draft this keeping in mind the worst case scenario. When you're thinking about what this commission's goals are, who we're trying to hire, and what might that person who's receiving the information do with that information.
But I think we can actually, you know, I think, Commissioner, if I'm listening to Commissioner Bryan correctly, I think we can actually specify where the information is collected, who gets to see it, what disclosure requirements are, and what actions can be taken based on the information. I think we can actually put some specificity around that to address your concern about future generations of leadership. So again, I'm not trying to get too fast into a trial close, but as a trial close, I actually do think we could probably draft something with the input of the various commissioners that will reflect a consensus. And I trust general counsel and staff to say either, yes, I feel like I can draft something that represents a consensus view of the commissioners, or not, in which case, again, we can come back, and perhaps you can come back with two alternatives. But I actually think I'm listening to this, and I don't hear anything irreconcilable that cannot be addressed through explicit, a little bit more specificity about what information, to whom it goes, how it's used, how it's disclosed. Mr. Executive Director?
Yeah, I guess, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just want to be careful that we're maintaining this as a code of ethics, not a human resources handbook or code of conduct.
No, I appreciate that, but I do recognize the concerns of Commissioner Tuttle. I think they're legitimate and important, and I actually think if we're going to require this, it is not out of bounds to say we're going to put some conditions about how the information is collected and used. So I agree with you that it starts bleeding into human resources policy a little bit, but I think it's required to get to a place that we're all comfortable with on this information. So I appreciate that caveat, that's appropriate. General Counsel.
May I just have a point of clarification, which is my understanding is that it will be okay to leave those categories in there as long as there's some clarification on how the information is collected.
I think that's what we're asking this work. I'm sorry.
What were you asking?
I'm sorry. So it's okay to leave the categories felony, misdemeanor, or ethical misconduct in there as long as there's some clarification on how the information is collected.
I'm asking you to work on that with
Yes.
the commissioners. Okay. I'm not trying to put any commissioner on the spot right now. I'm asking you to work with the individual commissioners to get to clarity around that. And my hypothesis and hope, and it might be a misplaced hope, my hypothesis and hope is that you can get to alignment and consensus, but I want you to do that with each of the individual commissioners. And this, again, I completely trust your judgment. If, in your opinion, you can't come up with something that represents a true consensus, the commissioners will come back and discuss it again. So thank you, I appreciate that.
I trust your judgment on that as well.
Thank you.
So are there other things that we want to give to staff, particularly the general counsel's office, to work on? I don't think we're going to get, therefore, these issues, in my opinion, are too substantive to vote to approve the subject to these changes. These are not administrative or ministerial changes. So I do think we're in a situation where we have no choice but to put this on our next agenda rather than try to vote and approve on it today. But I recognize your concern, Commissioner Farley, which is why I'd like to raise that nature of comments.
I'm very uncomfortable proceeding with commencement of operations if we do not have this. I'm uncomfortable with it. But I also take the view that the code of ethics that was drafted is more than sufficient. I think it's well drafted, I'm going to be supportive of fairly stringent ethical requirements, and that's just kind of the place where I come from. It's something that I've operated under for my entire career, and I think that it's really important to have them in place, again, because we're a regulatory agency, and make sure that we understand the nature of the business that we are engaged in. So,
is it fair to say? I'm sorry.
Sorry, just so that doesn't get mischaracterized. I also are very much in favor of stringent requirements, and when there's an ethics code, I intend to abide by every word of it, and that is why it's being.
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with anybody on the commission in terms of not being committed to a strong code of ethics and abiding by it. I can speak for everybody, I hope on that. It is my understanding that we are currently, Commissioner, General Counsel, it is my understanding that we are currently bound by the state code of ethics until such time as we approve our own code of ethics, correct?
absolutely.
So we do.
We're bound by even after we.
So my point, I guess, is we do have a code of ethics in place. The law requires us to come up with one that is more restrictive. We're working on that, but it's not like we're operating without a code of ethics right now. We are operating under the state code of ethics, and so that is at least, I guess, the way I think from my belief. Because I agree with you, we need to have a code of ethics in place before we issue commence operation. I'm completely in accord with that, but we are required to, and we're bound by the state code of ethics.
Then why wouldn't we adopt what was drafted and then come back and amend it?
I guess that's an option. I'm not sure. Commissioner, you're looking like you were one before. I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's like you're.
No. Well, I understand where Commissioner McBride comes from. I think we come from the same place when it comes to ethics. Personally, I don't know a life without having to conform to ethics, given my 22-year career in government. And I think that, and I could be very wrong about this, but legislative intent was to say that we needed this additional code of ethics, and that Commissioner McBride has a point that we're, to do commencement of operations without having this in place goes against that. And I think that we could sit here and dissect all day what we think is appropriate, not appropriate. The reality is that as a regulatory body and a state agency that operates in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have an obligation to do this. So, I would be okay approving this subject to amending the details of it later. But I think if we're going to allow commencement of operations, we're going to get into the pre versus post. Pre-code of ethics versus post-code of ethics. And for me, that's dicey. And yes, the state ethics code is out there. Yes, the OCPF code is out there that we have to abide by. I just think that given the regulatory nature of this body, this is important. And I think that we should take action on it.
I'm just wondering how long we have the room. Maybe we should just sit down and hammer it out right now.
I think we probably have the room until 5. We also have the subject of medical regulations that we have to get through as well, which is time sensitive as well. So.
It's an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's possible. Okay.
I'm definitely prepared to discuss it now. That's why I wrote everything out and explained my rationale. But I'm definitely not prepared to just ram through an ethical code that I have clarification with.
So let me just understand. Is there any substantive issue beside the reporting of felonies and misdemeanors? I mean, you've made other suggestions. I have not heard any substantive debate on any of the suggestions other than the reporting of appreciate it. I've not heard any other substantive comments other than around reporting of arrests and convictions. Am I missing anything that people feel like, I'm happy to continue this conversation, so I'm just trying to get an order of what we need to talk about. So clearly the section on arrests. I think I did not hear any objection to taking section C of social media out of this and replacing or moving the other 3 social media sections into other parts of the document. I didn't hear an objection to that from anybody. I heard it said a bunch of things that require further definition, which I don't think need debate particularly. So I'm not sure there's anything more than that one topic, but if I'm missing other substantive issues, go ahead, Commissioner Tuttle.
Just the one on page 7, the one about disclosing the offer of gifts.
Okay.
So I have one question about that.
Go ahead.
Doesn't that come under the President Code of Ethics gift law? Is that the same thing?
No, go ahead, William.
It's not, so it does go above and beyond what's required in the
But I thought your suggestion there, Commissioner Tuttle, was a definitional suggestion about what's acceptable.
See section B that's crossed out? So that's the requirement that every time someone offers anything that could be considered a gift, that we would have to make a disclosure.
But if we define such gifts so that, asking you if they can buy you a cup of coffee to pick your brain is excluded, or do you have a problem with this reporter requirement?
It might actually be more direct, I think, to define what has to be disclosed rather than what doesn't.
But this is a common sense objective, so the requirement of disclosure of the issue is just triviality. It should not be required to be disclosed. Be comfortable with that. Okay. Commissioner or General Counsel.
Yep, and we would be fine with working on that. We can also think about gifts of a certain amount. That might be a way.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand if we have any other substantive issues that need to be discussed if we're going to try to get to closure on this today, as it feels to me to be the consensus that we need to get to closure on this today.
The question I have is that Commissioner McBride and Commissioner Title both said that they'd like clarification on certain phrases.
Right.
Well, is that going to be done later or now?
I think editing in real time is probably not a great thing to do. I think we can get the edits and we can either give definitional authority to the General Counsel, or we can figure out a way to have a special meeting of the Commission to review the work of the General Counsel before we start commencement of operation certificates. Yes.
Can I propose that this be delegated to the legal team and Commissioner McBride and myself?
No, I'm not happy with that. This is too important. I have complete confidence, please, I have confidence in Commissioner McBride, Commissioner Tuttle, and our General Counsel, but I'm not going to agree to a document that binds my behavior without feeling like I have some say in it, so I apologize, but I'm not comfortable with that. I am comfortable working with the Executive Director. We'll figure out a time to have a meeting prior to issuing commence operation certificates. We don't have an exact date on that yet. And this has some personal cost to me to do this, but I'm happy to figure out a way to have a commission. We got Mr. Executive Director. I've only got one that I'm aware of, which is about the arrest and reporting. But I do think we should ask the General Counsel to work, and I'm sure she will welcome the input from any commissioner that wishes on the definitional issues. And we will have to figure out a time to get back together as a commission to do that prior to issuing final certificates of operation.
Can I ask 2 questions? One, Commissioner Title, on page 8, when it wrong, because I'm just going between too many documents now. It says a commissioner that or employee may use official social media accounts only in their official capacity. You added that part.
No, she just moved it from another
Okay.
section.
All right.
So that's a.
Because I'm wondering,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
we have a team of people, so why would a commissioner use the social media accounts if our team does that? And that's just my.
I didn't write that.
This code applies to both commissioners and employees.
Oh, okay. And then the other question I have is that, does this go into effect immediately after we take the vote?
General Counsel, I would assume so, yes. So, again, I'm trying to structure this conversation. So the issue of arrests and reporting is substantive. Are there other substantive issues other than the definitional requests that we're making in the General Counsel and staff?
Well, I think there's the question that still exists about the social media policy generally, right? Because there have been things that were moved around.
Well, there were things that were moved around, but 3 remained intact and unedited.
Right,
correct?
and then
So one's being proposed to be removed,
Right.
which is the personal one. So I'm happy to talk about that. That's the second substantive issue. If you'd like to discuss it, great. Are there any other substantive issues?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I actually don't see the definitions as a substantive issue. I'd be fine with just delegating that to the legal staff or something.
Well, okay. That was my hope, but that's reasonable. So I think we should, let's get into it. I'm not sure which one I want to do first, but
Well, so if we take the social media one.
thank you. That was going to be my suggestion, but thank you for doing that.
So I think that I think that there is a place in here for language like this. Maybe not necessarily this language. I'm referring to page 11.
I'm just talking about the second paragraph of page 11. Commissioners or employees
Yeah.
may use either an official or private social media account.
Page 10 and 11 of the document that we were given for the meeting. So going back to my original point about the reason for having ethics and like the OCPF regulations and laws is to make sure that there isn't an element of coercion, or there's not either actual or apparent coercion. So if we look at, I think, what the intent of this is, and maybe marry it with that reminder about what types of posts or
I'm not sure I'm following you. I
so
apologize.
this is kind of broad, right? While commissioners and employees may use social media for their personal communications on their own personal time, and then we have this, which is kind of squishy language. They should be thoughtful about their postings, as their personal postings may be viewed in light of their public position.
Right.
Do we want to be putting, or does it make sense to put something in there that hooks that more directly to the reason for having this provision in there is to ensure that postings aren't unnecessarily coercive, or, and I don't know if there's a reasonable way to kind of phrase that, if that's the idea.
Can I ask, what's the ethical basis for restricting, as opposed to the behavioral basis, which belongs, as it says in the code of conduct or something like that? Is there an ethical basis for restricting people's personal social media comments on their own time, on their own accounts?
Yeah, so if you look at, Commissioner Title moved this one, but under D,
I'm sorry?
social media, so section.
Would you mind kind of, would you come up?
Sorry.
Thank you. Excellent.
Is this okay? Okay, so under 13D, which Commissioner Title has proposed to remove.
13D in the original, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is an ethical restriction, and it provides restrictions on both the use of official social media accounts and private social media accounts. So state employees cannot use either types of social media accounts to send what we consider inherently coercive solicitations. So there are 2 categories of people who cannot receive these types of solicitations. There are people who are under your official authority, so people like your subordinates and people you regulate. And the second category of people are people who you have official dealings with, meaning who you come into contact with in your official positions. So if a constituent calls you seeking assistance, for example, or needs you to answer a question, you've had official dealings with that person. You can't then turn around and ask them to support your marathon run or support a private cause that you're interested in. That would be viewed as inherently coercive. So D already does cover.
But I think the issue is with C. I mean, I understand D. That makes sense to me.
Right. So I guess my suggestion is that what Commissioner McBride is bringing up is covered by D, and so C is just extraneous.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question, and I realize this is coming from the civil rights background, but what I was thinking of when I read this, and I may have just
You're talking about C?
I'm talking about C. What popped into my head was the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act, which has another layer on it from the Federal Civil Rights Act, where it forbids state actors, which we all are, from interfering with people's ability to enjoy their rights, etc., by interfering by threats, intimidation, or coercion. And that's what I was thinking of in terms of what we were shooting at here. And there's a whole bunch of case law that sort of spells out what's threats, what's intimidation, what's coercion, etc. And some of that is speech, so essentially making someone act in a way they wouldn't have otherwise acted because you, the state actor, have said something that chills their right to exercise, their business, their daily conduct under the law. So that's
saying use your judgment when you're using personal social media. That's a totally different issue. I'm willing. Let me finish. I am more than happy to put in whatever restrictions people are comfortable with about not using your position and using social media as a medium to use your position to force anybody to do anything. Totally happy with whatever language you put in there. But I do agree with Commissioner Title that telling people to use their judgment is not an ethical issue. So what am I missing?
May I perhaps suggest some limiting language?
What kind of language?
Limiting language.
Sure.
So while the commissioners and employees may use social media for their personal communications on their own personal time, they should consider their legal and ethical obligations in making personal postings. So you would be limiting it to the kinds of concerns raised by the various commissioners.
I think if we're suggesting that staff and commissioners should consider their legal and ethical obligations, we would probably need to do that in many other places as well, because I feel like having an ethical code, by definition, suggests that in every action you would be considering your legal and ethical obligations.
So can I? Well, first and foremost, what sticks out in C is on their own personal time. So unless we're going to have for employees a punch in, punch out system, technically 9 to 5 is your working. And I know that people are entitled to breaks, they're entitled to lunches, and that would be considered personal time. So it's not as if they're on their social media all day long posting whatever it is they want to post. But I think the question I have is, and this is where the area gets gray, and I don't mean to muddy the waters, is the implied piece of this. Like, if I say, as a commissioner on the Cannabis Control Commission, if I say a certain thing, it's implied that it could be coercive to other people. And if we have public pages, take Facebook for example, you have a public page, you don't know who you're quote unquote friends with. So if you're friends with anyone who works for the commission, those are your subordinates. If you are friends with anyone who could be working for a marijuana establishment or as a lobbyist for an establishment or an attorney for an establishment, then all of those people come under this big cloud. And it's really hard to manage that unless everyone's page is private and you have to accept all this. But for me, it's the implied piece is what personal communications can be anything. But it's when you're saying it and they know your title. There's a reason why OCPM says we can't use our current titles if we're gonna do political activity. You've gotta use your former life to do that, whatever you were in a former life. And I think this kind of still has that gray cloud over us that if we say it, some people take it to heart. Others may not. Others may go the opposite direction and say, she feels A, I'm going B, but some people may feel coerced to do certain or say certain things. That's my concern when it comes to the merging of personal social media and public positions, is that it's not as cut and dry as if you have a Twitter account that just says your name, but then they know what you do for work. And so people may feel as though that's just conflicting.
I just want to agree with that. You are you.
You don't stop at 5 o'clock.
I don't know. I don't know why we're separating social media though from everything else, which is, anytime I open my mouth these days, I am the chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission. And as much as I try to hide from that sometimes.
We can broaden this.
But Mr. Chairman,
No, but I'm saying, but we're talking about social media, and I guess I don't, if there's a concern that you have, which, wait, let me finish. There's a concern you have, which I understand, and I agree with. I don't know why it's just about social media as opposed to communications in general, in which case it should be a broader ethical issue rather than just limiting social media.
But with all due respect, you're in the paper every day because you are the voice that is talking to the newspaper.
Not every day.
When we're talking social media, it can be something. If you look at my social media,
I don't.
I post things about mental health and substance all the time. Why? Because I'm involved in those areas, and it's not a secret to anyone that I'm involved in those areas. In the back of my head, I know that I can't post an event coming up, but there's money attached to it, because embedded in that is someone's solicitation for money. I know I can't do that. What we're saying is that for people who may have never worked for government before, and this is what I'm trying to get to, they don't know how to live under that ethical code yet. They're not sure about how to do this yet. And you wouldn't want to put people at risk, and that's why muddying the waters between, and social media, quite frankly, is a way people communicate these days. And they use it to tell you they went to the gym, they tell you that they read an article, they tell you where they're going. And that's where I think social media becomes a big part of this ethics, is that how do you, as Commissioner Doyle said, be you, but at the same time maintain this code of ethics in an industry that has not come to Massachusetts in a way that it is right now. And so if we are overstretching, and again, we're here in open meeting law. This is for transparency, not efficiency, right? Everyone wants to know what we're talking about, and we're here talking about it. The same thing comes with social media. It is just, it's an immediacy. It's something that people use all day, every day. There's no, shut off between 9 and 5, except Commissioner McBride. But I think it's something that we have to really think about, because it is not as black and white as we would like it.
But I completely agree with you. I believe that you need to be incredibly explicit for all the reasons you said about the things you cannot do on social media because they are coercive. I'm totally and completely support that. What I'm not willing to do is, because you might do something wrong on social media, put other requirements on personal social media other than don't do these coercive things. And we have to have a list of 27 of those things because people are not familiar with state government. Let's put together a list of the 27 things you cannot do on social media and leave it at that, as opposed to saying use your judgment, or whatever the language is here.
Well, I could be wrong, but we're not going to get an inclusive list and not leave something out, and that's going to put people at risk.
Well, I'd rather, frankly, leave something out than prevent people from actually having the ability to speak on social media. That would be my opinion. Go ahead.
So essentially, under state laws, I understand that the rules for social media are the same as under any other communication. But in a case like, if you're soliciting someone for donation to a charity, you can't target them, right? So you can't call them, you can't email them, but you also can't tag them into a social media post. So that's why in some of these rules, social media is mentioned specifically. So that is already incorporated, as I understand it, in this ethics code. So if people want to go further, then I would welcome specific suggestions, but I haven't heard
We could put popping out of my mouth right now because it is just what I'm popping out of my mouth. But what the, yeah, sorry, I don't know how to blow it up, but.
It's okay, I can read this one.
Okay. It, language that, you know, could be deemed to interfere by threats, intimidation, or coercion with the exercise or enjoyment by any other person or persons of rights secured by the Constitution of the United States. It goes on and on and on, so I don't want to read it all out loud and take it. But it's General Law, Chapter 12, Section 11H, and it may be too narrow, but it's a start.
I like limiting, being very explicit about limitations, whether that's the right language or not, and then not saying anything beyond that. So you can't do these things. That's it. So I like that idea. I'm 1 of 5 votes. So, yeah. Commissioner Tyler.
If we're going to invoke civil rights, we probably want to consider free speech as well. And so I'm not sure we're able to do that right now at this meeting.
Okay. Commissioner.
I agree, I don't think we can do that this meeting.
Okay, I want to be as efficient as anybody, and I want to be very respectful of Commissioner McBride's opinion, which I agree with, that this has to be done before we issue certificates of operation. So I would like, Mr. Executive Director, your thoughts on how to make those two coincide, get this done. I don't think we're going to get done, we stay here till midnight. I actually think what's required is work of the General Counsel and her staff, input from the commissioners to deal with some of the definitional issues, but deal with some of these issues, based upon the conversations in your work, you can come up with language that we can agree on. If not, we'll talk about it again in the subsequent position meeting, but I'm not sure what the logistics are. But I think we need to do both. We need to get this done so that we can issue certificates of operation, commence operation, when we're ready to do so. I don't know exactly what that date is, but I think we have to get this done before that. I think it's more meaningful right on that side. So, General Counsel.
I just have a moment to talk with you.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what, I desperately need a break. 5 minutes.